Human Rights Watch report published yesterday dove into the now medium-term effects of the Taliban's reform of the education system in Afghanistan. And we're not going to focus in this video on what effect it's had on girls and women in that country. We've done multiple videos on that. And effectively, access to education has been massively curtailed. I think most people understand that at this point. And please watch our videos about that topic. It's also having really negative impacts on boys in Afghanistan as well. And so let's talk about some of the ways that manifests. You have the departure of qualified teachers, which included women. Regressive curriculum changes and the increase in corporal punishment have led to greater fear of going to school and falling attendance. Because the Taliban have dismissed all female teachers from boys' schools, many boys are taught by unqualified people or sit in classrooms and no teachers at all. There are hours during the day where there's just nothing happening. The students are just in a room. There's no teacher because they fired virtually all of the teachers. In place of education, you now have more corporal punishment, as we said. Boys and parents told rights groups about a spike in the use of corporal punishment, including officials beating boys before the whole school for haircuts or clothing infractions or for having a mobile phone. They've also eliminated whole subjects like art, sports, English, and civic education. Why not? You probably don't have any teachers to teach those subjects anyway. And so this is a reminder. And look, it manifests in different ways, but the drive to control and subjugate women does not make men stronger. It makes them feel stronger by comparison, I suppose, but a society cannot flourish, a civilization cannot flourish when it does everything it can to hold at least 50% of its citizens back. And you're seeing that manifest in Afghanistan now too. What do you make of this, Maz?
You know, it sounds like Florida. I mean, I was reading somewhere where a lot of teachers are fleeing Florida because of all these restrictions and what they're trying to not teach. You know, these types of regimes, they prosper under less education. They don't want people to be educated because then you're questioning. It reminds me of, you know, obviously a lot of this stuff is based in religion, and most religions have a lot of good things, but then when you have a totalitarian thought process behind that religion, they're going to use the religion to oppress people. I don't know if you ever read that book, Under the Banner of Heaven. It's about the murders, the Mormon murders back in, I think, the early 80s. But one of the things that it pointed out was that women in that era, and I don't know the Mormon faith that well, but at least in that era, were encouraged not to question. And so similarly here, you're encouraged not to question. Don't question what I'm telling you God told me that you should do. Don't question that. And so God has told me, Taliban, to come in and not put women in schools because God told me that. And if you question it, you'll be beaten. And not only will you be beaten, you're going to stay home. And now all the boys that are there, if they question it, they'll be beaten and they'll be killed or whatever it is. And so these are just ways of oppressing people. And again, I think in the long run, I feel that justice will come around, and I think that it will prevail, because currently we live in a world where these young people that are trying to be controlled also have access at times in certain ways to the internet. And as we grow as a world, you're going to have more and more access to the internet. And the more these people are sitting there and not being allowed to go to school and seeing women in other countries going to school and doing what the things that they wanted to do, it's going to be harder and harder to keep the cap on this society. I mean, Saudi Arabia is a good example. Saudi Arabia currently has, made some huge steps for Saudi Arabia to let women drive, to let women walk around in public without covering themselves up if they choose not to. And as you said, I think it's helped Saudi Arabia in the long run in terms of being able to build their economy and attract business to come to Saudi Arabia. So these other countries, I think we're going to have to face that at some point.
I certainly hope that you're right. I think that if we're going to see that sort of evolution, I think that the mechanism that you identified is one of the only ways that we really could hope to. But it's also why, and I'll just briefly throw this out there, it's why I'm very worried about the current state of the internet and the direction that it seems to be going. Like the ability to quickly get accurate information There's been some pretty high profile attempts to limit that. Twitter is not what it used to be. The ability to spread information, regardless of where you're from, to organize social movements and protests and things like that. It's almost as if it's being destroyed on purpose. And the internet is being flooded with misinformation, making it harder for people to, understand what's truly going on. The ability to see like, hey, here's a healthy society. Here are people being treated with respect. A lot of that stuff is being washed out by Andrew Tate videos and other hate mongers and the radical trad wives preaching willful subjugation. And I hope that accurate, good information gets through with all of these attempts to sort of like kick up dust. But I am worried about the current state of the internet.
Yeah, you make a good point. You're absolutely right. But I think that in the long run, I think that more and more truths, or more and more, at least others that are in an oppressive state will see how there's people living in a freer way and want that. I think that's part of what causes some of the uprisings that we see, is people within countries that are oppressive going, wait a minute, why isn't our country having the freedoms that those countries have? And you're right, there's always a backlash, because then there's the backlash of like, well, I'll tell you why our country doesn't. It's because of those foreigners, it's the immigrants. Go get the immigrants. It's because of the LGBTQ community. I mean, they spin it a lot. But ultimately, I am somewhat hopeful for the future. I don't know when that'll be. Maybe it'll be a few hundred years, but hopefully we get there.
I hope you're, well, now as a parent, I'm really hoping that by the time she gets to like being like, in her teens or something, really hoping we have a more understanding society. Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.